Good evening. Welcome to the long range forecast discussion for November 22nd, 2011. And I want to start off first with the snowfall coverage over North America and Northern Hemisphere. And as you can see, we have plenty of snowfall over much of Eurasia, of course, over the North Pole, and over northern Canada. I'm harping on this for one very important reason. There's, let's just say, another internet source out there that was claiming that there wasn't snow in central Canada. And I just want to make it very clear, as you can clearly see, there is snow cover in central Canada. And that's allowing the polar air masses over portions of Alaska and northern Canada to strengthen and intensify, and the same thing with our Arctic air masses up in this part of the world. And also we have an extensive snow cover over Siberia and much of Eurasia, and that of course leads to one very important thing: the potential feedback mechanism needed for a negative NAO pattern. Usually when we see this type of above normal snowfall, and just to be clear, as you can see with the chart here, we are above normal for November. What that usually translates to is a winter that features very powerful polar and Arctic air masses and also a west-based negative NAO pattern. Just wanted to put that out there because there was some confusion. I was getting some emails that there was some information suggesting that there was no snow in central Canada. As you can clearly see, we have snow in central Canada, which is very important to our forecast as we move forward over the next 15 to 30 days. I also want to bring up the MJO. We're going to use the European here just to kind of get to make a point here. The model guidance pretty much, whether it's the European, the UK Met, the GFS, they're all pretty much saying the same thing, and that there's expecting to have a strengthening of the MJO wave in phase 2, which would be a pattern change phase, and then it goes into 3-4. Going into the European guidance for the ensembles, and you can see what happens here. What does this mean? What is this telling us? Well, a lot of people are picking up on the fact that it's moving through 3, 4, and 5, which are warm pattern signals. The problem here that people aren't picking up is look how fast it's moving and look how weak it is. I don't buy this for a second here, or at least not right now. The reason why is because the MJO wave has been pretty weak, and in phase 2 there really isn't any indication at this time of this type of intensification. I like the idea of this right here, go right along almost neutral, very weak wave, and even in this stronger solution it still ends up being rather weak in 3, 4, and 5. Now what does this mean? Well, it means that yes, we're going to continue to see a transient pattern, but notice how fast this whole MJO forecast is moving. This whole wave is moving into phase 6 again, and eventually phase 7. When it gets into this phase, we end up with troughs in the east. And what are we ending up with as we move this MJO phase through 7, 8, and 1, and now pushing into 2? Well, we're starting to get a trough in the east, thus our rainstorm. So we've gotten rid of the southeast ridge. We've at least the sustained southeast ridge, and we are getting rid of the huge polar vortex over Alaska. So we're starting to break down the old pattern and redevelop the new one. This takes time. This is not happening overnight, as I've been saying. So as a result, the models are not going to handle this pattern transition very well, and typically they'll try to rush things as far as the evolution of our new winter pattern. And of course, because some people do not listen to the fact that you cannot trust long-range models beyond 180 hours, they get a little bit too overexcited about, hey, the model guidance went warm, the model guidance went cold. Doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is observations and what those observations and teleconnections mean. Looking at the the European Malgans and the GFS Malgans here for the 7 to 10 day average. As you can see, we are sending progressive troughs through the United States. We are starting to develop a ridge over the Gulf of Alaska as opposed to a deep upper level low that was in place. Remember, this pattern was a deep upper level low here that extended into the west coast as a trough and then a huge ridge in the east. We are getting away from that pattern, but again, it's not going to happen overnight. One of the things that has to change is getting rid of these lower heights here, so this area of higher heights can translate up into Greenland and start to translate into a negative NAO pattern. But at least we're getting to the first point, which is a trough in the east trying to establish itself, and most importantly, basically the scarring out and the destruction of the polar vortex and upper level low that was setting up over central and eastern Alaska, because that is bad news for snow lovers in the east. You do not want that at all because it produces a deep trough in the west and a ridge in the east, as we've been seeing the past few days. Looking at the actual GFS Malgans day by day, you could see our deep trough is gone. We have a ridge signature starting to develop here. We have a rather impressive storm, which matches up very well to the MJO phase of 2, right? Basically 8, 1, and 2. Perfect matchup of a deepening upper level low and upper level storm, a low pressure system at the surface intensifying. This will likely be a warm storm for the northern mid-Atlantic. Make no bones about that. Again, we're not in the winter pattern just yet, but this is an important step to get there, because this upper level low will translate up towards the St. Lawrence River Valley and start to redevelop the lower heights in the Canadian Maritimes. Meanwhile, we have another trough trying to dig into the west. Notice over the Pacific, though, we're certainly getting better in our Pacific pattern with a trough signature over the Aleutians and a ridge building up into portions of the Gulf of Alaska. Moving forward into late next week, you can see that we're clearly changing the pattern here. Remember, about 5 days ago, there was a huge trough here, right? Now what we're developing is a trough over the Aleutians, a strong ridge starting to build into the Gulf of Alaska, starting to expand into Western Canada, and we're still dealing with a deep trough over the western United States. But notice that the ridge is not able to build and dominate like it did earlier on, just 2 weeks ago. As a result, our cold air is starting to hang tough over portions of the northern mid-Atlantic, so we're clearly cooling down to near to slightly below normal levels. And most importantly of all, if we consider where we're going here, if we roll forward here, I think this is going to be a little bit more progressive, and this trough is going to be here. Now, you might be asking why. Well, you see this trough, see this disturbance here? The European Malgans tends to hold back these disturbances a little bit longer. So let's say this is here rather than here. And so what you end up with is a much more, how do I want to put it? A more longitudinal trough. It's a full face trough, should I say, that sets up over the southern plains rather than the southwest. So I think that's what we're going to see. Push this a little bit further east. And I think this ridge is a little bit weaker, and it's trying to show that in some of the ensemble guidance. Now looking at the GFS guidance, again, we're moving forward. We definitely have a trough in place. And as you can see on the GFS model guidance, we clearly have a deep trough in place. That upper level disturbance is a little bit more progressive, and you end up with a trough around the Aleutians, ridge over the Gulf of Alaska into Western Canada, and a trough in the east. No sign of a negative NAO pattern just yet, but we end up in a much colder pattern than what we are currently dealing with now. Again, this is a slow step down, and I would not be surprised if the GFS is a little bit too aggressive here, as these models tend to, let's just say, speed up the pattern change a little bit too fast as we move forward in time. One thing to point out though is that we pretty much get where I think we're going to be heading here, which is a deep trough around the Aleutians and the western portions of the Gulf of Alaska. The rest of the Gulf of Alaska ends up with a ridge into western portions of Canada. All that cold Arctic air in Canada is forced to the south, focusing on the northern plains, bleeding into the northern mid-Atlantic, and we end up with this nice deep trough in the eastern United States, with the potential for our subtropical jet stream, which will be right here, to add some mischief to this pattern. So clearly we got a bit of time to wait before we get to this pattern. Again, I wouldn't take anything seriously as far as a storm until after December 15th. But I will say this, we are definitely moving in the right direction. We just need patience. And please do not follow word for word every model that happens to come out every 6 to 12 hours. You'll just drive yourself nuts. That is the long-range forecast discussion for November 22nd, 2011. I'm your meteorologist, Stephen DiMartino. Have a wonderful evening.